So the panel will be 4 persons that you have met throughout the sessions. You just met David. You've been in all these sessions. In I think the first session we had you, Emma Gunnarsson from the company Kemira that David referred to. We will have in the panel also Goran Skoglund, who is representing the energy company in the city of Helsingborg. And we will have Mikael Jakobsson, who has a very long background in developing heat networks, both in Sweden and now since 15 years back in Asia. And you are actually in Mongolia as we speak, but we seem to have a good connection. It all started with a crisis. David mentioned that. In 73, most buildings in Sweden were heated by oil, very similar to what you have in North America and in Europe. Most buildings are heated by gas. We had a crisis. We had the first, the Yom Kippur War that triggered a series of oil crises in the 70s. And the response in a country like Sweden, well, it was actually straightforward. It was reducing the temperature, indoor temperature from 22 to 17. That in itself saved 1/3 of the oil we consumed. And that's widely discussed in Europe now. Can we do a similar step here to reduce the need for gas? So we put on a jumper. Then we had a more systematic approach, very much highlighted in Dave's presentation: conserve, connect, and convert. And in the city of Helsingborg, that evolved into a situation where in 50 years, the city went from 0 kilometers of pipes underground to 750 kilometers of pipes, connecting basically all buildings in the city. And since then, beyond the city, as you will see in a next slide. 1/3 of the heat comes from a local company called Kemira that Dave referred to. So over this period of 50 years, we've gone in this city down from basically 100% fossil fuel-based heating to a heating system which consists of less than 2% fossil fuels. The bulk of it is waste heat from different industrial processes, of which Kemira is one. And this has generated loads of different benefits. So it was done for energy security, but it generated a lot of side effects, which have been very, very positive for the Swedish economy. One thing we often forget is the balance of trade. It has significantly improved our balance of trade as all the oil was imported. I've done this experiment since in the past 20 years, the city has expanded the network further to connect it to other cities in the region, actually all the way to the city of Lund, which is a university city in south of Sweden. With this pipeline, we reach a population of 500,000 people. And just for the fun of it, we put that on the same scale. We put Hamilton in the center and to look at the potential reach of a similar system in Hamilton, and it would easily reach 5 million people. So there is profitability doing this in Helsingborg, but it should also be possible to do it in Canada. And it brings us back to the panel, and the big topic that we will discuss is stakeholder involvement. How do we get this done? The technology is fairly straightforward. So if I can invite all the panelists to open up your cameras, and if I could ask those who are not in a panel, if I politely ask you to turn off your camera, so then we will have the panel on stage. And we will try to cover a number of questions that have been asked during and after the sessions we've had. And I will start with actually the backbone of this heating system is the pipe network. It's a bit of a hen and egg, or chicken and egg, you say in English, dilemma. Where do you start? It's like a road network. Where do you start? Do you connect that house or that house? So you sit on the key solution, Goran. How did that happen? How did you get going with a pipe network that took it from 0 to 750 kilometers in such a short period of time?
Good question, Peter. It goes back to the 60s, really. there was a situation in Helsingborg where we had a local environmental problem, where there are stories of housewives not daring to hang out their wash because of the heavy pollution coming from thousands of local chimneys using coal, etc. So it was apparently a very bad situation, and that started a process of centralizing the heat and distributing heat in a different manner. So we actually started with some, I don't know the exact number, but 3 or 4 local heat centrals or district heating centrals, which was later centralized to one single plant. And I would say it was a combination of as you said, crisis, and a local environmental or pollutional crisis maybe, and on top of that, the oil crisis that you mentioned. So it was very much a need to change situation, I would say, that triggered this.
So, but the crisis passed, and you still continued to put pipes in the
We
ground.
did.
So why
Yes.
did you do that? I know, I mean, you're dealing a lot with communication and trying to, answer questions from the general public. Why do you dig up our streets? So why did you continue doing that?
Well, I guess it's a situation that once you get started and once you see the opportunities and the advantages, there's no really going back. For instance, in the 80s, at the beginning of the 80s, we started the construction of our next plant. It was scheduled for oil. It was converted to coal and then converted to biofuel. And that, I think, and that had a dramatic impact, of course, on carbon reduction. And that, I think, was really setting the tone for the whole thing. Plus, and we'll get into that very shortly, our cooperation with Kemira, where we could utilize residual heat, which otherwise would have been flushed out in the sea. That, I think, laid a very strong foundation for district heating. And it opened the eyes on, I think, many of our policymakers and politicians that this is really something to build on. So the flexibility, the fuel flexibility, and the flexibility of input to the network, that was a very strong point. And then we'll talk about that later. But then, of course, you have to communicate. You have to talk to people and tell them why you are doing what you're doing in the streets.
Absolutely. We will soon come back to you, Emma, but we have the pipe network. Now, you have explained that you started with the crisis, you expanded it because it was useful, profitable. Mm-hmm. How did you get customers? And how do you still get customers? Are you forced to connect as a customer, or it's kind of a monopoly, obviously, a heat network?
Yeah. Well, we have worked closely with the city, and of course, one target group, I would say, and one stakeholder group are the policymakers and the politicians, because there are inherent advantages, environmental and safety or security of supply, I should say, advantages with district heating. And once our politicians and policymakers understood that, it was easy for them to specify district heating in the building code, in the local building code. So when a new area is developed for housing or for property development, district heating is always specified, meaning that the area should be prepared to connect to district heating. It should be available. Then you don't have to do it. You can find other solutions. That's your choice. But district heating is always there for you.
So as a customer, I can choose. I mean, I can. It's not a monopoly anymore. I mean, it's not regulated. You're not forced to be connected.
No.
But still, people are. Is this? Do you see this as a? Yeah, I mean, it must be competitive in terms of 95% of popular, buildings in the city are connected.
Yes, it is. I mean, there was a period when we had a monopoly discussion in Sweden as a whole, especially around district heating. Then some 10, 12 years ago now, something called the price dialogue was started, I should say. Can't find the word. What it means is that we sit down once a year and we talk to our customers. We explain, we show our books, we show what we think about the fuel prices, about the interest rates, about service costs, etc. And we say, we think we need to adjust the price with 1% this coming year with a maximum of 1.5% in the next 2 years. And we agree. And that's it. And that has been, I would say, a key success factor in taking away all the arguments about monopoly. Be open, be transparent. That's key.
And I think this is a critical point, obviously, because we will never see two parallel heat networks being built. So it has to be, it's a natural monopoly. So transparency, but also freedom to disconnect and to go for a heat pump or another solution. I think there is another, I will soon come to Emma, but one more question to you, Goran, is in the current situation now with rapidly increasing energy costs across Europe, how has that affected the customers of heat networks?
So far, very little. I mean, we have a price commitment for this year and for the next year. We are keeping a keen eye on biofuel prices. They are affected by what's going on the energy market. We have other sources, as you are well aware. Those have not been affected still, or yet, I should say, to any big degree. So I would say that our district heating customers, they are quite happy in the current situation, where we see electricity prices going crazy from day to day. We see gas prices going up substantially. So right now, we're in a sweet spot.
Yeah, and this is probably, and now I will come over to you, Emma, but at the conclusion, the advantage here is that it's a local resource you use. Gas and electricity can be easily exported to another part of the world, and it is very much so now. That's why we have electricity costs going up as they are. The heat network is still limited to a certain geography, which means that based on waste heat from various sources, it becomes a closed system, so to say. So that brings us over to Kemira, and Emma, you're responsible for the relationship with Oresundskraft, and it's been ongoing for 40 years. And you tell me often when we speak that this is not the core business of Kemira, but it's an important business. Mm-hmm. So why are you connected? First place, why does it make sense to you? It's not the core business, so could it be a risk to you?
To give you the context there of not being the core business, Kemira is a global chemical company. We have production in 63 sites. 2 of them are supplying heat to the surrounding city, and Helsingborg is, by far. There we are talking about the largest volumes. The other site is quite small. So from that context, it's not core business, but for site Helsingborg, it is an extremely important business because it then creates an income that actually is then turned into a credit on our core production cost. So in that sense, then it makes us more competitive and increases our competitiveness on a both national and global market, which is, of course, very important, especially in these days. with high energy prices.
I mean, still the transparency is, and that's great to hear. But the transparency issue still is also vital, I guess, between you and Oresundskraft, that you have a very tight and ongoing dialogue. How does it work in practice on a daily basis? I guess you have, or a weekly, monthly, you have a regular contact on planning.
Yeah. I think, as I see it, I think it's really important to, although not core business, but it's a really important customer for us. So I need to treat Oresundskraft like I would any other customer, meaning I need to know what creates value, what doesn't create value, and how we can fit into that. And obviously that goes, vice versa as well. But for us in practice, our production rate is directly proportional to the heat that we are able to deliver. So that means that our planners will have to take this contract into consideration as well, and have knowledge and awareness of this when planning our core product production. You asked about how we do it in practice. So, well, the demand planning is one thing, but we also have different forums. We have operative forums where people responsible for the actual, operation of heat exchangers and supply temperatures and forward temperatures and etc. have daily contact basically. And then there's somewhat a tactical forum where we have a dialogue with where I have a dialogue with the heat and power production responsible at Oresundskraft. And there's also a third forum that's a strategic forum where our respective CEOs are meeting. So we're working with this in different contexts and from different angles all the time.
Yeah, well, you have quite a big responsibility. 1/3 of the heat to the city comes from Kemira, so I guess this is a strategic topic as well, discussed on a high level in the company and between the companies. Have there been opposition to this? I mean, are there people saying, "Oh, this is a technical"? I hear that sometimes when I talk to industries that we would be very cautious connecting ourselves because it could involve technical risks for our production. Is that something that a concern you have?
No. Technical aspects is not an issue really. We have, if there were some technical failure in the network of Oresundskraft, we are able to cool out the heat and to continue our operation. So that is not an issue. And if there are some, technical issues concerning the temperature that we get or something, well, it's handled directly by our operations. So it's managed just like any other production issue.
Do you see any reaction from your staff? I know, I mean, business is business, so it's about generating returns and customer satisfaction, but it's also a responsibility to the staff you employ and to the local community increasingly. So I would say, do you see any reactions, and do you feel that there is a positive spirit around this?
Yeah, I think there is a really a sense of pride in this actually, but I also see that I have yearly energy educations for the staff, and every time I say, we are responsible for 1/3 of the heat of Oresundskraft, there's always someone says, "Wow, I didn't know that. Why are you not talking more about this?" So I can never stop talking about it. But
the communications is vital. I will jump over to you, Mikael. You have a broad experience of this in the terms of that you've done similar projects in Stockholm, in Denmark, but now in the past 15 years in Asia, in various parts. And I know from conversations with you that this is a big topic in China and other countries. So could you elaborate a bit on the trends in other parts of the world?
Yeah, first, thanks for a great event so far. And I think it was a really great introduction in the beginning. It was really good points pointed out there. So I could maybe just hook up on a few things that was said earlier there. I mean, about the crisis, obviously, that is driving many things at the moment. But talking about the drivers, I mean, it was right, as you also said, Peter, before, that pollution was, of course, a very, very big driver in many of the countries here to really do something about district heating in general. Then it was sustainability that came in as a more, let's say, hot topic to meet that. But then it came, like Goran said, also about the energy security, both about energy cost, but also about energy access, which has really driven or been a driver for integrating industries to the district heating system and work on all kinds of heat recovery. It's heat recovery from industries, all kinds of different industries, but also to recover heat from wastewater systems or data centers and these kind of things. So many sources that now the heat is recovered into the district heating system. I think that is important to remember, that we have a lot of waste heat. Globally, 50% of all energy in the world are about heating and cooling, 50%. And there a lot of it is, of course, wasted, and we can use that. So I also saw during the great slides of David before was a fantastic summary of what we have talked about over the course of this period. And it was one thing mentioning about smart and smarter heating systems. And that is obviously very, very interesting for many to talk about smart, and it's IoT and it's AI and machine learning and big data and all these kind of fancy words. But what we try to say is that, sure, we need a smart energy system. And when we talk about smart district heating, we are not really talking about those kind of terminologies like is referring to intelligence. We're talking about more what are the features that we should achieve with our systems. So we say that it is a multi-dimensional thing about smart district heating, and we want to achieve certain features. We're talking about, obviously, it should be intelligent, absolutely, but that's only one. It should be efficient, it should be flexible, it should be competitive, it should be integrated, it should be reliable, it should be safe. It should be these kind of features that we should achieve. And that is smart. And this we have to think about through the whole system value chain, from production, transmission, distribution, consumption, the whole system value chain, but also the whole project process. Because we start at, we talked about how do we start the building this system. Well, it starts with planning, and then it's design, and then we should procure the right technology. Then we should construct and install something. We should commission something, and then we should operate it. So through the whole project process, we also have to think about being smart and achieving these kind of features. I think these things are something that we are able to push forward now, and thanks to this driver, it's obviously much easier. And I can say anecdote actually now, but like you mentioned, I'm in Mongolia now, and with all these things going on in the world, that okay, there will be both, let's say, embargo or whatever it is when it comes to the purchasing gas from Russia. One would say that, okay, but maybe here in this part of the world they will buy it. No, they see the problem also. They directly now say, we don't want to rely on gas in the future because this is not safe. We have to build our own district heating system, rely on our own fuel. We have to recover all heat we can, and we have to achieve this energy security. And this is really something that is echoing now in the world. These crises coming after each other, it's really helping to push it forward. And what you are doing, Peter, I must say also that Jeffrey said in the beginning there about connecting the dots. I think having these kind of events and bringing experiences together is great to move things forward. There was a lot of speak, so I stopped there.
No, but that's great. I'll move over to you, Dave. Why Hamilton? Why is it this? Is this I haven't been to Hamilton yet. I will come in a few weeks' time to see it live. I'm very happy to do that. But tell me, or us, why Hamilton?
Well, thanks, Peter, and we look forward to you visiting us and us being able to show you the city. And there's all the pieces. We think all the pieces that we've talked about and that many that Mikael talked about are all fit into Hamilton. And in Hamilton, like number one is that Hamilton's really Canada's industrial corridor, or its heartland. I mean, this is the Hamilton is the home of the steel mills and the heavy industry that goes with it. And we you know, as somebody I think raised in the chat, what about how is it with just Kemira and it's almost single sourcing? Well, Hamilton has the ability of you know, to have more than one industrial source, and you know, it's something reminds me of when we talk about the importance of district energy, or one of the things that district energy gains. It gains the diversity and of the users, and you spread out how each user peaks or slows down, and you spread this all out and you level it out. Well, with Hamilton has the ability to have, with multiple industrial inputs, to have diversity of supply. So we have diversity of supply, we have diversity of demand. So it's a really good mix to put together. The other big thing is that there's the GTHA, or the Hamilton, the city's growing. Real estate prices are such that lots of people are moving into Hamilton, and we're going to see a building boom in Hamilton. And we know that newer buildings are easier to build, to be suited to district energy, or to have heating systems that can be converted to district energy. So we have the plus that there's going to be a lot of building going on. There's going to be a lot of densification, and that all fits to making a district energy system work. Densification and new builds. So that's another big plus for Hamilton. We've got a district energy company, so we're not starting from scratch, and that's one of the things I think that's important. Is that yes, it's a small district energy company compared to Oresundskraft, but at least it's a start, and it's not like you're trying to build both a supply network and a demand network at the same time. We have the demand network, and we are able to use that highway, that thermal highway, and change fuel sources. So we think that's really important. And the other thing, and we get into this integrated energy network, is that Hamilton is a very old city, and the downtown where the densification is going to take place is an older city, and it's one of the first cities in Canada to be electrified, and the infrastructure is old, and the electrical infrastructure is old, and it's going to take it's not going to be a simple case of electrifying and switching things over and putting in heat pumps and doing all this. It's not going to work very well, because you know, Canadians are used to going into a room and flipping on a light switch and the lights come on. They're used to that. No one would think of talking to the utility about putting an electric car charger in. It's our right to be able to go out and buy an electric car and put the charger in the garage. No one would think that they might have to ask whether that was possible, or how the utility will deal with every house in the neighborhood having an electric car charger. That's just our right that we're able to do this. So those are all things that we think we need the benefit of the integrated networks, that we need to have this as a complementary system and need to have this working together. And that's why we think it's Hamilton's well suited, and Hamilton really needs this.
Yeah, and I think it's a question of habits, as you say. I mean, if you're used to, like we were in Sweden, oil boilers, and you have gas boilers, it's hard to convince. But it's hard other way back, going back as well. I'm trying to sell a gas boiler in Sweden today. Burning gas in my home, you know, that would be very hard sell, I would say. So it is a tradition that we need to develop here. Mikael, you often talk about that, because I'm now moving into how do you get the project going? I think it's great what you mentioned, David, that you have a network, you have experience. It's not big, but everything in heated networks, as in everything else, starts with small things and then they grow organically. So that's a great basis. You always come back to the importance of heat planning, Mikael. So what does that mean? And how important is it? And why would you need a heat plan?
Yeah, so I think Goran also mentioned a few things that has been put in place in related to Öresund. One should remember that the Swedish Heating Act is not old. It was put in place in 2008. Before that, there was no regulation really in Sweden on district heating. Then Goran mentioned about the local building code that is enabling district heating, definitely, which is also important. And then the third one I would say is heat planning. No matter the kind of heating act and the building code, you still have to do heat planning. I'm just saying that those things are really favoring district heating development and something that is possible to influence, especially the local building code. But I mean, heat planning is really important because that is to understand what do we have to work with. We see very often, and it's not only in Asia, it's all over the world, I would say, that it's a very, very much technology focus. Everyone is looking up, and nowadays all this hydrogen here, and it is electrical heater there, and all these kind of things. Just very much focus on technology instead of looking down and say that, okay, where are we standing? What are the demands? What are the demands now? What are the demands in the future? What kind of local resources do we have? Who can we share energy with, the neighbor, and things like that? So an energy plan is typically first you make a great assessment to see what do we have to work with, what are the basic conditions, what are the development for the future, the heat demand projection, the energy cost projection, availability of fuels, all these kind of things, looking at 5, 10 years, 15 years. Then you go in to do the scenario analysis, where you're putting up different scenarios and then simply do socioeconomic analysis on it. And this is what the plan is doing. Two countries that can seem very similar, Sweden and Denmark, have very different practice when it comes to heat planning. Even though the countries are very close, totally different. In Sweden, we have an act saying that we should have a heating act, and not much more than that. In Denmark, it said that you should have one always updated heat plan. So they're updating every year this heat plan. There's not always as heavy updates, but like every 5 years they make a heavy update, and then every year a small revision. And this helps them, of course, to develop very sound, flexible district heating system and achieving these things, because the world change. The world do change, and we do guess wrong, and we do the wrong projection, of course. But then we can take small steps to adjust to a changing world. So it's very important with heat planning, and cost-wise is nothing. It's a fraction for all the pitfalls that you will avoid.
I will actually bring you in on the conversation, Adam, if you turn on your mic. We are working very closely, you and me, in developing Heat Academy and trying to find these arenas for exchange and collaboration. You're Canadian, but you lived in Sweden for many years. Do you see a cultural difference here that makes it harder to implement district heating systems in Canada compared to the culture here in the Nordics?
No, I don't. As a matter of fact, I think we share a very similar culture. The motivation for me many times driving back over the Skyway Bridge for years and years when visiting Hamilton, my hometown, from Sweden, was there's huge opportunity. There's huge opportunity to change, and district heating was one of those things that really got my attention really early. And but from a cultural standpoint, I don't think that there's that much of a barrier. We share the same environment, the same climate, which I think impacts and forms our way of thinking. But I think it's more about the communication side of things. That's a big hurdle, because people don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they want until they see it. And that's a big challenge. And I think it's one of the positive outputs of sessions like this, sharing and collaborating and trying to establish desired future state, acknowledging that there is a problem, and the Canadian government has made that very clear. We have got some big, robust challenges in terms of decarbonization, and heating and cooling, of course, is at the top of the list. So how do we do that and bring all the collaborators and stakeholders together to agree upon what the problems are in order to start to address what the solutions could be? So culturally, I don't think we have so much more in common than our neighbors to the south sometimes, I feel. I mean, the Swedes have a fantastically easy time to communicate, as evidenced by the speakers on this call. And they're very sharing community of individuals that want the best corporately for everybody.
It often becomes like in these sessions when we bring in Swedes that we, say, oh, we are great. I think first of all, we have to say that all Swedes in this session, we've inherited this. We were not operational, I believe, any of us in the 70s. So we live on what other people created, and we have developed it. We are developing it. And there has been a lot of mistakes made along the road. And this is an advantage for cities like Hamilton and other places to actually learn from the mistakes. What should you avoid? And what should you focus on? And to learn what you should avoid is often a bigger save than to learn what you should do. So I think that collaboration is critical.
I think that was one of the first conversations David and I had was, where's the music playing and what can we learn about evolution? Which mistakes have the Swedes made that we don't have to replicate? We don't have to go down that path. So that in itself is very, very valuable when you're embarking on such a significant stepwise change.
We got a few more minutes, and I'd like to test on you in the panel as scenario. We come to the conclusion it all started with a crisis back in the 70s. And for Sweden, that was a disaster because we have no fossil fuels in our own country, and not like the Norwegians. We have very, very, very little. So all of it was imported. Had that crisis not happened, we would probably be as dependent on gas and oil as anybody else in Europe and in the world today. And we would have been in a very critical situation. How do you think, if I start with you, Goran, and then you were sitting and you were talking with Emma and Mikael here and saying, we need to do something. You have a lot of waste heat available and we have customers. How do you think such a process would work out? How would it come about that actually we started to build a heat network in the city of Helsingborg? I start with you, Goran.
Well, it may sound ominous, but we have a crisis. We have a climate crisis. So I cannot rule out that the crisis factor would drive the discussion once again. And then it's a matter of realizing that heat is a resource. It can be created or it is created and then not used. And I think a driving factor in that hypothetical discussion would be, how do we utilize a resource that is so valuable? And is it worth it? And if the answer is yes, then we would do it. We would do it all over again.
And we have to keep in mind, if I interrupt you, the waste heat, the residual heat has no value unless you can distribute it.
Absolutely.
So again, otherwise the value is very limited because you can't sell it to anybody. So the heat network is critical. Do you see, Emma, that a scenario where Kemira could be aware of the value, the potential value you have for the city and also for yourself, because it generates money for you? It's not a charity, it's business, as you said before, selling waste heat. That you came to a city and said you need to build a heat network.
I don't see that. I don't see that as impossible at all. I think that from our perspective, we're an energy intensive industry. We have performed energy reviews and optimized our production for many years. So we would have sort of identified this as a source. And obviously it would have been, how can we utilize it? How can we transform this into money, basically? Or how can we utilize this better than what we're doing now? So I think that a dialogue with the local energy company or with the municipality would be sort of the starting point for this. I also know that when the network from Kemira to Oresundskraft was built in '73, that investment was to a large part financed by government, energy funding or climate funding. So that also was a driver to both us and to Oresundskraft to get this going and to not to get sort of stuck in that decision on who is taking the investment and the risk for that and so on. So I think that policies and local municipalities also have a very important role to facilitate and to sort of drive these kind of corporations.
Mikael, in your experience in Asia, do you see this happening, that industries are driving the process, that they feel that they sit on an asset that could be used and that could also generate value for the industries? Or is it often or always policy makers who kind of regulates and takes the initiative?
I mean, the change have just happened now, I would say, in the past year or so, 2 years, that it's driven by the industry, but it is because of policies, and that, yeah, indirectly is, you can say, some kind of incentives, but because before a lot of different organizations have been thinking in silos and focusing on their core business a lot. They have not really thought about what the neighbor is doing, or there has not been any incentive to do something. I think it's really what Emma says also, that to provide these incentives and unlock the funding for get going is quite important. That's what we see, no matter if we talk about heating in, this where I'm now, where it's extremely cold, or if we look at cooling in the Pacific Islands or something, to really prove the concept with a pilot showing that it can work, people can touch it, people can see it, then it can get going. And I mean, one example, worked in the city of Anshan in China. It's 3 million people, something, a steel plant with several thousand megawatt surplus heat. They were not until 2012, when we started to work with them, they started to use that excess heat. The excess heat was 200% of the demand of the city. And we're talking about that the steel plant is located in the middle of the city. That's why the city is there, because of the steel plant. And there what we started with was that where it is feasible, and David said it before about the heat density, which is, of course, is important to have, let's say, an economically viable district heating business. We started with a pilot project that covered less than 10% of the heating demand where district heating was feasible, to prove the concept that you can supply this part of the city with surplus heat, and then it get going. So I mean, to create this, think big, start small, get going, and make a push, whether that is with incentive, unlocking financing, creating the right policies and so on. That is really the way to move forward, because definitely in a lot of places people are not talking. Absolutely.
Thank you, and thank you to all panelists. Goran, you have one more remark.
I'm sorry, David. I work in communication. I have to tell you this. Once you realize that residual heat can free up electricity for better purposes, your tagline writes itself. Let hot steel charge your car.
That's a great.
I'll give you that for free.
Thanks a lot, Goran, for that. And thanks to all panelists for joining from wherever you are.